The sweet realization of victory. As Guyana's election results came in, these opposition supporters could hardly believe it had happened.
We're looking for a better Guyana, a united Guyana. Finally, victory is ours.
I've waited, and I always waited 23 years for this change, and we finally got the change.
A major political shift is taking place here. After more than 2 decades of continuing rule, the governing party is out of power. But something else may also have been defeated in these elections. The long-held assumption that almost everyone in Guyana will cast their vote based on race.
It is changing rapidly, very rapidly. It's not anymore Indian and Negro. It's rapidly changing.
Is he right? Will this election be seen as a turning point? The end of the racial divisions that many governments here have promised, but none have achieved.
Victory is ours.
Guyana has long been the exception in South America. A former British colony, it is the only mainland nation in the region where English is the national language. They drive on the left here. The politics, too, is unusual. A few days before the election, we went to 2 political rallies. This one was held by the governing party, the PPP. The then president, Donald Ramotar, who has a Marxist background, is addressing the crowd.
Well, comrades, that is illegal to make racial appeals in our country.
Look at the faces. Almost everyone here is Indo-Guyanese, descendants of indentured workers brought to Guyana mainly from North India by the British. Across town at the opposition rally, there was a different crowd and a different atmosphere. Here the supporters were mainly Guyanese of African descent, confident that they could break decades of Indian-dominated rule. And with reason. The opposition leadership had formed a coalition, including many Indo-Guyanese who'd broken with Ramotar. Their attempts to appeal to the Indian vote may have sometimes appeared almost crudely obvious. But the size of this crowd seemed to justify the optimism of presidential candidate David Granger.
And don't go to sleep until you hear David Grangers, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana.
On election day, there was an air of suspicion, as we found out outside this polling station.
Who saw what happened here?
There had been a rumour, not true it later turned out, that a ballot box had been stolen.
We need a change. Our people are suffering long, they are dying long, and they're suffering long.
Given the divisive politics here, the assumption was that whoever lost this vote would contest the result. Anticipating that, teams of election observers were in country.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Most senior, the former US President, Jimmy Carter.
But I think everyone in Guyana is dedicated to trying to have a peaceful process. And of course the role of the international observers is not to interfere, but to observe and try to encourage the winners and the losers to accept the results of election graciously and peacefully.
He said it would not be changed in a way that would meaningfully influence the results.
In the end, after several days of confusion, the final results were announced.
APNU AFC 206,817. The PPPC 201,457.
It was close, but the opposition coalition won by just over 1%. A far tighter victory than Granger had predicted, but an historic shift nevertheless. Does he think this is the end of ethno-politics in Guyana?
I wouldn't say it is the end. I would say it is the beginning of the end. The pattern of voting indicated to me that there had been some shift, but the old patterns have not been completely erased. I think the PPP was able to capture many of its traditional voters
I mean, there is concern amongst the Indo-Guyanese community that it's a sort of tit-for-tat process, that now the Afro-Guyanese are going to be dominant in power here, and they may be victims of that. How can you reassure the people of Indian descent here in Guyana that that won't be the case?
Because for the first time in the history of Guyanese politics, we have a six-party coalition. And that six-party coalition guarantees a high degree of representation of non-African people, particularly the Amerindian, mixed, and Indian people. For example, my prime ministerial candidate, Mr. Moses Nagamutu, is Indian, and he was a member of the People's Progressive Party. So the change has started.
Within the Indian communities of Georgetown, there was a distinct reluctance to dwell on the results as they came in, and some fear of what might lie ahead. Ranald, who runs a machine workshop, says this is not the time to be bitter.
The will of the people and the right of the people, their choice must be first and foremost. And whatever the majority says has to be. And I hope it's for the better for the country.
Guyana remains one of the poorest countries in the Americas. Despite a population of less than 1 million and substantial mineral resources, no government to date has managed to make significant inroads against poverty here. The first few days you're in office here, what are the first things you want to do generally to improve the situation for the people of Guyana?
The first thing I want to do is find out where the PPP put all the money. Because they'd been taking much of the revenue from gold, diamond, and other mining industries and timber industries and putting it into a special fund which did not come before the National Assembly. That is one of our great grouses and grievances. But apart from finding the money, we've got to assure citizens that we're going to be safer. Guyana has a high rate of crime, murder rate, road fatalities, suicide rate in the hemisphere. And it has affected business, it has affected fishing industry because of piracy. So that would be my second message, to make Guyana more safe by dealing with the problems in the police force to prevent cocaine trafficking, gun running, and trafficking in persons and other crimes.
Grangers' tenure may be beginning at a time of economic opportunity. Just weeks after the election, ExxonMobil confirmed that it had made a significant oil find in waters off the Guyanese coast. It's yet to be established if that find is commercially viable. But the discovery has inflamed a long-running border dispute with Venezuela. It says the exploration is taking place in disputed waters and has from the start called for all work to stop. Granger says that is not going to happen.
The matter with Venezuela was resolved by international tribunal over 115 years ago. And Venezuela has revived this claim purely for internal political purposes. There's no international basis, or there's no basis in international law for what Venezuela has been claiming. I'm not worried about that. The matter is unresolved from their point of view, but as far as international law is concerned, Guyana's case is on a sound evidential footing.
Do you have any concerns about the situation in Venezuela? It's on your border, it's having very, very serious economic problems. Your predecessor was perhaps quite conciliatory and perhaps closer politically to the Venezuelan leadership than you might be. Are there any likely consequences of that?
Obviously, we have to cultivate a cordial relation with Venezuela. As you know, in international relations, there's a very famous quotation: you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your neighbors. But you can try to ensure that your neighbors are friends. And we have followed a course of pursuing cordial relations. I wouldn't call it conciliatory, because conciliation could lead to, I suppose, domination. I would like to feel that on all three of our borders, my foreign policy would be cordial. We can't afford conflict. We're too small. We're a nation of fewer than 1 million people. I'm not afraid of going to tribunal because I think our cause is just.
You've turned to politics relatively late in your career. You're in your late 60s. You had a long career in the Guyanese army. Could you have ever imagined this extraordinary sort of later in life thing that you've turned to politics and now you're president?
I didn't plan to. I only came into this phase of my life 5 years ago. It's a very short political career. But I'm committed to Guyana, I'm committed to national unity, and I do believe the skills which I learned in my various professions. I was also an academic, I was a military officer, I used to have my own publishing company. All of these skills now have brought me to this stage, and I do believe I have a contribution to make, and I believe the majority of the population thinks so too.
While the Victory Party continued in Georgetown, Solomon, a consultant, had words of advice for the winners.
Now that this government is in charge, they need to show Guyana and the world at large that they are indeed more mature, more prepared, more competent, and are going to deliver the services more efficiently and more effectively than their predecessors.
Grangers' political opponents say that the election day euphoria will soon wear off as the realities and complexities of governing take over. That may well be true, but something does appear to be changing in this often overlooked country. A new generation is beginning to vote, not on the basis of who they are, but on what they think.